Support for the program today comes from Slow Burn, a podcast from Slate. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, a white supremacist became an American political phenomenon. On the fourth season of Slow Burn, they're telling the story of David Duke's rise to power and prominence, his election to the Louisiana legislature, and then his campaigns for the U.S. Senate and the governorship, an existential crisis for the state and the nation. You can binge the entire fourth season of Slow Burn now in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen.
Family is everything. And at Volvo, we do everything to help keep yours safe. The Volvo XC90 SUV offers a range of advanced safety features, from an available built-in booster seat for children to pilot assist technology, which helps keep you centered on long road trips. Wherever you go, summer safely. Get 0% APR financing for up to 5 years and exclusive lease offers on the XC90 during the Volvo Summer Safely Savings Event.
It's not every day a very serious candidate for president of the United States announces a $2 trillion climate plan. In fact, it had never happened before Joe Biden did it last week. And it speaks to how discombobulating this particular moment is that you may have missed the news altogether. If you did, we're here to explain it to you. And where to start? Well, I know. Let's start with the other guy, because President Trump has been taking action on climate too.
I mean, I guess you could describe it that way.
David Roberts writes about climate change at Vox.
He's re-envisioning an approach as no approach. First thing he did in office was pull the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Agreement, which I think was a signal as to his intentions. And since then, pretty much the sole action he's taken on climate change is to reverse or roll back Obama-era regulations meant to control it. That is really the sum total of what he's done on climate change.
And what are the latest developments on that front?
It's a little bit hard to keep track because there's one or two of these a week.
He has repealed and weakened regulations that protect water, air, and land. And this includes repealing the Obama-era Clean Water Rule, weakening protections for endangered species, and loosening rules that limit pollution and carbon emissions.
But I think the one you're talking about is he is not tightening soot pollution standards. And of course, soot is notoriously damaging for lungs and heart health. And it's also notoriously kind of racist in its effect. It's concentrated in low income and communities of color. But he's also rolled back Obama's fuel economy regulations and Obama's regulations on power plants and Obama's regulations on methane. I mean, just go down the list. He's losing a lot of those battles in court, but that's what he's trying to do.
All right, so that's option A. And for contrast, option B, Vice President Joseph Robinette Biden Jr.'s brand new $2 trillion plan to combat climate change.
Yes, it is unquestionably the most ambitious climate plan ever proposed by a presidential candidate.
It sounds big. How should we break it down for the people, David?
I divide this kind of new democratic alignment around climate policy into three basic buckets: standards, investments, and justice.
All right, off we go. Let's talk about the standards.
Sure. So he wants to put, for instance, a net zero carbon standard in the electricity sector by 2035. So that would drive out all coal and natural gas out of the electricity sector and replace it with zero carbon sources in 15 years, which would be fast.
Really fast. And the investments?
Investments, right. Big public investments. So, and this is a real sign of how far Biden has moved. In his initial plan, he had $1.7 trillion in investments over 10 years. And in this new plan, he's got $2 trillion of investment over 4 years. So he really heard that critique and ramped up that part of his plan. And, you know, investments cover a range of things, but a lot of it is going to be in low carbon infrastructure, you know, sort of electric car chargers, high voltage transmission lines, CO2 pipelines. But it's the investments that I think hold out the most hope for creating jobs. And that is, of course, like Biden's overarching focus in almost all policy areas. It's jobs, jobs, jobs.
When Donald Trump thinks about climate change, the only word he can muster is hoax. When I think about climate change, the word I think of is jobs. Good paying, union jobs.
And what about the third and last bucket?
And then the third bucket is justice, which is sort of an overarching concern that covers the other two. So, for instance, he's saying that 40% of all these investments that he's talking about must go to vulnerable communities. If you're talking about $2 trillion, that amounts to quite a bit of money. So justice is sort of infusing the whole thing, and that means justice for the vulnerable communities that are hurt most by the effects of climate change, and also the communities that are invested in fossil fuel economies and will be hurt by the transition to clean energy. So like your coal mining communities and fracking communities, that kind of thing. You have to take care of those people as well if you want to bring them along. And this has sort of been forming on the left, on the climate left for a while, and Biden absolutely took it up and is echoing it. He is singing that song now, but it's really unprecedented for sort of the ambitious climate advocates, for the moderates in Congress, for Joe Biden, the presidential candidate. Everyone's more or less singing from the same hymn book on climate policy on the left now, and that's just a new thing in the world.
How did this come to be? Biden didn't start out as the climate guy, right? That was Governor Jay Inslee. Now, all of a sudden, Biden's Mr. Green New Deal?
Early in the primary season, Joe Biden put out a climate plan that was not received particularly favorably. Reactions were anywhere from tepid to extremely negative. The Youth Sunrise movement, people gave him an F- on that initial plan, which I think, there's some debate to be had about whether that was entirely fair, but suffice to say, it was probably among the weakest plans of any of the presidential candidates. The minute Sanders conceded, Biden and Sanders started working together with an eye toward exactly this. Like, let's demonstrate some unity. Let's try to bring these two factions of the left that have been fighting so much together. And climate was part of that. So the left, the climate left, sort of the green groups and unions and environmental justice groups and sort of the whole range of the left has been consulting and working on policy really furiously over the last couple of years. And they've sort of come around to a rough consensus or alignment around a few basic principles. And so this new plan is right in line with that basic alignment that's come out of the left.
You follow this stuff more closely than most. Were you surprised to see this old and new guard come together on climate?
Well, anything that appears good surprises me these days. So yes, yes, it is surprising. I mean, it is actually, I think the logic, sort of the strategic and political logic for why he's doing this is clear enough. Like, it's not, I mean, if you wanted to tell a cynical story about it, you could. He needs youth enthusiasm. He knows there's no prospect for real bipartisan cooperation on this issue. So there's no point in trying to sort of pretend there is. So you might as well just get the left on your side. So the logic is clear, but it does, I think, speak well of Biden, and I do think it shows that when he says, right, because when he first started running, there was a real vibe of like, I'm going to be the guy that restores normal, right? I'm going to take us back to a normal, sane Obama world that we all know and miss. And I think it's to his credit that he has seen the chaos since then and sort of come to appreciate that this historical moment is more than that. He's going to have to be more than that. And now he's started talking about, he knows he needs to be a transformational president. He knows he needs to be an FDR style big vision president. And that's not what he's known for. He's not really shown signs of that throughout his career, but I think he is genuinely aware of the historical moment and trying his best to respond to it.
All right, Biden has united with the left on climate. Now he's got to deal with the right. I'm Sean Rameswaram. That's next on Today Explained. Support for the show today comes from California City. It's a new podcast from LAist Studios. Here's how this one works. If someone told you that buying a piece of land way out in the Mojave Desert could make you a lot of money, wouldn't you be at least a little bit curious? I mean, if you lived remotely close to the Mojave Desert, well, it was a dream that developers sold to thousands of people in the California desert, but the reality turned out to be much different than that. And this new podcast, California City, chronicles the really, really dark side of the American dream and how it came to be that so many people spent a lot of money on a lot of land that's nearly worthless. I previewed this bad boy, and it's got all sorts of good stuff. It's like a modern-day Western crime noir. It's got some shady characters, some people who look like do-gooders but really might not be, a crooked police chief, and the person who started it all 60 years ago, an immigrant with a dream of his own. The first episodes of California City are available now, with new episodes dropping on Mondays. Download California City at laist.com/California City or wherever you listen to your podcasts. That website one more time, laist.com/California City.
This episode is brought to you by Avast, a global leader in cybersecurity committed to making your life online a lot safer. Avast is trusted by more than 435 million users to keep their data safe and their devices protected from nasty malware and other viruses. Avast has a whole suite of tools to keep your identity protected and your online actions hidden from prying eyes. No matter what part of your digital life you want to protect, Avast has you covered. A great place to get started is with Avast Premium Security. It thwarts all online threats, including ransomware, viruses, and spoofed websites built to steal your information. Or check out Avast Secure Line VPN, which encrypts your internet connection no matter what Wi-Fi network you're on. If you use a lot of public networks at coffee shops or airports where your data is especially vulnerable, this is the tool for you. Avast also has services like Avast Cleanup Premium, which helps get rid of your cyber junk to make your computer as snappy as it was when you first bought it. They offer a ton of other products to help solve every online security problem you could imagine. Don't worry about viruses, phishing attacks, ransomware, hacking attempts, and cybercrime again. Avast products are there to protect you. Learn more about Avast's privacy, security, and performance products at avast.com.
All right, David, Biden's got a bunch of the political left on board with this climate plan. What about everyone else? Let's start with conservative Democrats.
The sort of genuinely conservative Democrats that used to hamper climate policy back when Obama was trying to pass it are mostly gone from Congress, right? It's all part of this sort of partisan sorting. So like there aren't that many genuinely conservative Democrats left, or Democrats from sort of fossil fuel states. So there just isn't, that group of people is much smaller. And I think that they, much like Joe Biden, have seen that we're in a real historical moment here, and maybe like the normal political rules don't apply. So I think at the very least they are open to it. And plus, this isn't, as much as the right tries to make this seem like sort of Fruit Loop socialist whatever, Biden's talking about industrial policy to create jobs, which is just a long, storied American tradition. That's what the New Deal was. I mean, Americans are familiar with how government can do this. It lives in historical memory. So this isn't the kind of left policy that tends to sort of trigger centrists, right? I mean, investments in jobs like unions, like Richard Trumka of the AFL-CIO came out with complimentary words about this plan. The unions like the idea of giant investments that create jobs. Like, there's not really a political constituency in the Democratic Party who is against the idea of big public investments to create jobs, right? It's a very popular policy across the board. So
let's talk about the right instead. Republicans are fighting over extending unemployment benefits right now during a global pandemic. How's Biden going to convince anyone to work with him on $2 trillion in climate spending?
Oh, my goodness. Well, how much time do you have? He's a lot of hurdles. First of all, is the question of whether Democrats win Congress, win the Senate specifically. So if Republicans keep control of the Senate and Biden wins the presidency, all that legislation goes away. So that's the first hurdle. If Republicans lose the Senate, if Democrats win the Senate and Biden has the presidency and the House and the Senate, then he has to deal with the Senate filibuster. So the question is, will Biden and congressional Democrats try to substantially reform or get rid of the filibuster? If they don't, then once again, most legislation is off the table. Even like Chris Coons, a senator who has been a real institutionalist for years and has always defended the filibuster, even he said the other day,
I will not sit idly by for 4 years and watch the administration, the Biden administration, have its key nominations and its policy agenda thwarted. That was intended to say that I believe we should defend the filibuster, but I'm not willing to sit by for 4 years and watch an entire administration lose the opportunity to make real change.
Even the institutionalists recognize that we have to get something done this time. And if that requires procedural, sort of hardball, maybe, we'll have to acclimate ourselves to some procedural hardball. The one thing I think that Biden absolutely can do and absolutely should be focused on, and that people should absolutely hold him accountable for, is executive action from the president's office. And there's a lot you can do with the agencies. There's a lot you can do with EPA and Interior and stuff like that. And the only sort of cap on that kind of ambition is kind of boldness. Like, what, sort of, again, it's procedural hardball, but also it will depend a lot on the people he has around him. So I think in this administration, even more than normal, staffing is a huge, huge question. It's something that climate advocates are really focused on right now. Who are the people around him talking in his ear when these decisions arise?
When I hear you mention executive action on climate, I think about President Obama, who did lots of that, only to have it undone, as we saw, last week, this week, practically every other week, by President Trump. Any chance Biden has learned anything from being around for all of this?
Well, I think the main lesson from Obama's reign generally, but especially on climate change, is just Republicans aren't going to cooperate. There's no amount of pursuit, no amount of begging, no amount of, meeting them in the Senate cafeteria and glad handing them. All their incentives point to blocking everything. So there's a question of whether Joe Biden realizes this or not, because early in his campaign, of course, he was talking about look,
I get in trouble. I read in the New York Times today that that one of my problems is if I ever run for president, I like Republicans. Okay, well, bless me, Father, if I have sinned. But from where I come from, I don't know how you get anything done. I don't know how you get anything done until we start talking to one another again.
And no one really knows how much he's just saying that because it appeals to people, because it really does appeal to people when he talks like that, or how much he really believes it. But lately he's sort of dropped that. And so I think he's learned from Obama that there's no margin in slowing yourself down in the hopes of getting some bipartisan cooperation. You just got to go full speed the second you have your hands on the reins of power, because the window for getting things done is very short. And if you try to sort of talk Republicans into things, they will deliberately drag it out and make it take forever, like they did with the ACA, and just burn up the political power and momentum you have. and ruin your administration or anything after that. So hopefully Joe Biden has learned that history demands that he just take concerted action no matter what Republicans say.
If he could make something happen here, would that put the United States back on track with the planet's climate goals?
Well, that's a little bit of a complicated question. It's the basic target that the IPCC has laid out is that the entire world needs to reach net zero emissions by 2050. Slowly but surely, the countries of the world are all coming around behind that target. That's kind of becoming the standard target. And that is what Biden and Democrats say they are aiming for.
Science requires a timetable for measuring progress on climate that isn't 3 decades or even 2. Science tells us we have 9 years before the damage is irreversible. So my timetable results is in my first 4 years as president.
So in that sense, it is in line with what the scientists say. Now, of course, as much as some sort of hardcore climate advocates might want more, the fact is that if the U.S. can get its shit together and accomplish what is in Biden's plan, it would be one of the most amazing feats of national will in world history, much less American history. So this is not unambitious. So it's definitely putting us on the road that's in line with science. The ethics of it, you can always, more ambitious is always better. There's always going to be people who want you to be more ambitious. But this is about as fast as I can even imagine American politics being pushed.
David Roberts writes about climate and energy for Vox. He's got a piece titled Joe Biden Has a Chance to Make History on Climate Change up at Vox.com right now.
What if a salesperson told you that buying a piece of empty desert land in the middle of the Mojave Desert was your ticket to the American dream?
You know what? We are immigrants. We thought in America we cannot imagine this happened to us.
And what if later, when it was too late, you realized you'd made a huge mistake?
My dream is not gonna happen anymore.
Deep in the Mojave Desert, there's a town called California City. It was supposed to be a brand new city, LA, without the traffic or the smog. But that didn't happen. For decades, real estate developers have gotten rich by selling a dream here. But was it a dream or was it a deception?
Okay, no trespassing. Violators will be shot. Survivors will be shot again. Hello?
I'm reporter Emily Guerin. Listen to California City, The Dark Side of the American Dream, a story about money, power, and deception, wherever you get your podcasts.